I'm curious about the economics in the world right now are certainly very fluid, and a lot of countries are becoming more nationalistic, as you're saying, and pulling back. There's been a movement either to explore central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Either the United States just announced that, or they've already started creating it as China has. So what's your viewpoint on CBDCs? I know you've been very active on Twitter, as you always are, talking about CBDCs, but what's your viewpoint on that, and how does it relate to Veritaseum as well?
CBDCs are just the next evolution in digital money. The US and I keep saying I hate using this term, but then I go ahead and use it anyway. Developed nations or economies been using digital currency for since the early 70s, late 60s. Your bank account is digital currencies. Most people, when they say I have XYZ amount of money, they don't mean paper dollars or metal coins. They mean the ones and zeros sitting in their bank account. Of course, that is just a computerized ledger, a centralized computerized ledger with a database that says you have X, someone else has Y, you send capital to them, you credit their account X and you debit your account Y. Using the CBDCs, depending on how far they go along the distributed ledger technology route, how much they decide to adopt and how they adopt it and what they adopt, you get additional benefits such as built-in inherent audit trail, traceability, hopefully higher security. I don't think a lot of CBDCs are going to use asymmetric key pairs, which is a private key and a public key, which actually makes things a bit more secure than the way things are done. You hear about a lot of hacks in crypto, and that's simply not because of a weakness in the asymmetric key pair security model. It's the weakness in how people secure their own personal assets. You are given control of a private key. You own completely the risk and the assets and the liabilities of your particular crypto, your currencies, or your digital asset. And a lot of people are careless or don't read up on proper security practices, so they get hacked that way. That has absolutely nothing to do with the security of the system. I would wager, I haven't investigated it, but I'd be more than willing to bet that many more hacks happen with the centralized system than an asymmetric key pair system. Primarily because you have one honeypot to attack. And if you break into that honeypot, you get to ride away with everything. Asymmetric key pairs, you literally have to hack each and every asymmetric key pair. You have to get to every private key. Much harder to do. Okay, that's like fighting a war versus one large Goliath or, 10 million mini Goliaths. And you have to get all 10 million of them to get the same amount of money to just attack and defeat one Goliath. So, but the media doesn't want to look at things from a forensic or factual perspective. They need the bigger story. I remember this when the internet came out and smartphones, etc. So everything's a boogeyman when it's unknown. It helps sell ad space and gather eyeballs. But back to the original question on CBDCs, you have the obvious privacy issues because the blockchain, if they use a distributed ledger, whether it's a blockchain or not, but it leaves a audit trail and the provenance, and that is rich in information, which you can use to cross-reference with all types of information. An example I used is, let's assume that Apple will kowtow to the government and other large technology providers such as Samsung, even though they say they don't or won't. I wouldn't bet my life on the government not having backdoors to these devices.
Sure.
Let's assume you have an Apple Watch and you use an iPhone and you're a health fitness freak, buff, not freak, sorry. And it tracks your heart rate and your blood pressure, GPS location, of course. It also triangulates location via Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and a variety of other methods. And someone is accused of, say, robbing a bank or making a false transaction, a fraudulent transaction, buying something, selling something that they allege was not what it was. Okay, selling something that they purported to be something that it wasn't. Excuse my grammar. They can actually track you down to your specific location between GPS, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth, okay, and triangulation of where you are on the cell network. They can figure out how much money you accepted and or gave for that object. If that object was digital on a blockchain, they can even track that actual object. Okay, they can measure your heart rate. So let's say, yes, I sold Bored Apes for more than it was worth, but I wasn't aware of it. And then the prosecutor says, but your heart rate spiked when you hit the button, according to your watch. Why is that? Just by cross-referencing all this data, which they potentially and actually have access to, depending on legal system subpoenaing, etc. That level of personal privacy breach is outrageous from our perspective. George Orwell had no idea what he was talking about in 1980 when he made that book. I don't know when he wrote the book, but the book was 1984, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But if you take a look at what is capable now, Big Brother is more like the gigantic, gargantuan brother, because they have an eye and they can peer into all aspects of your life, from your heart rate and pulse to what you spend, how much you spent, when you spent it, your frame of mind spending it, at least from a physiological perspective, etc. And that's what we're looking at with CBDCs. Now, there's another side as well. CBDCs are one thing, but the private stable currencies are another. As long as there are no backdoors and tracing, and there's a decent amount of it, the most popular private stable coins, I think, are Tether and USDC, and they both have government backdoors. Not saying these are bad guys, because you can't really say no to the government safely. Okay? You probably can't say no to the government, period, but you will put safely on just as a legal disclaimer. If you use a stable currency that works, like an algorithmic currency, but again, that works. I'm not sure they work because they haven't really been tested, and a lot of them have failed to test. But this is an ongoing beta or alpha program. Then you have the ability to transfer stable value totally autonomously. That sounds like a very good idea. I'm highly in favor of that. You take an algorithmic stable coin that works, and that's a big, quotation, parenthetical, and you mix it with a privacy coin, the technology behind, say, Monero, etc., as long as it hasn't been hacked or broken yet, and you have the ability to truly transact value and stable value with a decent amount of privacy and security. You mesh that with the Veritaseum's IP, and that is conditional transfer of value, and you have an entirely new way of doing things throughout the world with no barriers. Now, a lot of this runs antithetical to what the government needs, because the government needs to peer into transactions. They need to peer into this privacy. They need to tax. They need to do X, Y, and Z. So you have competing interests. But I gave you two examples of what the technology is capable of from the government oversight perspective. And I'm not knocking governments. If you ran a government, you would have to be inside everybody's business too, or your government will eventually fall. Or from the other side, the privacy, security, stable value transfer perspective of the individual corporate user, assuming good actors. And good and bad is a story for an entirely another video. Because remember, one man's terrorist is the next man's freedom fighter. So we're not going to get in good versus bad, but we're just talking technology for now. That was a very long-winded answer, but I think I covered both.
I really appreciate that answer. But one last economic question. Again, you've never been shy about talking about economics, going all the way back to your blog. But what's your outlook with all these different things all these different fluid situations? Where do you see like the economy for both the U.S. and also with the SWIFT system and like international trade? Where do you see the U.S. and world economies heading in the next year or two?
Well, that question is extremely difficult to answer empirically, accurately. But luckily, we're going about answering it. We have a sovereign risk model that we've created. It started with the FBI social ferment model, basically the likelihood of social unrest and people taking over the government. Okay, The model is actually fairly well done. It's done by FBI analysts and was used with the FBI. And we took it, we built upon it, strengthened it. We put strong forensic analysis, fundamentals, geopolitical risk was built in heavily, and global macroeconomics analysis. And it basically connects, I'd say about 40 different countries, doing things from jet debt to GDP, net debt to GDP, contagion analysis, contagion linkages, where the banking system is connected to the government, foreign debt, etc. I'd say hundreds of variables over 40 different countries, all interlocked. And that's being repopulated for today because it's a very, very interesting time. I think geopolitical and global macroeconomic risks are the highest now that they've been since I've been alive, that I can remember. I was probably alive during the Bay of Pigs, but I wasn't old enough to realize what was going on. But things are very, very high now. Linkages, and common liabilities, the likelihood or ability for a daisy chain, a domino effect, are higher now than they've ever been. And, I don't want to say temperance and temperaments because that puts a human characteristic in, but the likelihood for something to kick off even further is significantly high. If you take a look at China's threats going back and forth, then China likely looking to give help to the Russians, and the U.S. and the EU and the Brits are giving help to the Ukrainians, and fallout from a Russian default, whether technical or not. Apparently, Russia has claimed that they evaded default by paying their Russian interest due, but they paid it from sanctioned and frozen funds. And so they say it's up to the U.S. to release the funds. They say we have the money, right? It's just up to the U.S. to release the money. So they're trying to politically put the blame in the U.S. I heard that spokesman for the Treasury said the funds would be released, but the Russians misspoke. Okay, so if you had the money, then it's not up to the U.S. to release the money, right? And if it's up to the U.S. to release the money, then you don't have the money. That brings me back to this saying that I always favorite: "If it ain't your keys, it ain't your cheese." So
yeah, that's a common saying in crypto. If you it's not your keys, it's not your coins.